All right, hello everyone. So what we're going to be covering is we're going to get into chapter 5, which is going to be safety around vehicles and around the shop. This is kind of going along with what we've talked about in lab yesterday, as well as going into completing your SP2 and all of the information that you'll need to complete that. So we're going to focus on this one today. That way we all have kind of an understanding of the different shop safety procedures that we're going to be looking at. So what we're going to cover is we're going to cover the different hazards that are in a shop. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about might sound a little bit scary because stuff can be very dangerous in the shop. It is one of those things that just about every chemical is carcinogenic or can burn you, hurt you, scar you, whatever it happens to be. So we need to make sure that we're prepared for that, as well as we're dealing with heavy equipment and hot and extremely hot temperatures of components. So we need to make sure we're looking at that. Choosing the appropriate personal protective equipment is going to be another big one. And then safe shop tool use. That's going to be the kind of final thing, because oftentimes when there are injuries in the shop, a big part of that is because equipment was used improperly. And improperly used equipment can result in people getting injured regardless of what kind of PPE they have. So another thing to kind of bring up with the safety aspect of stuff, because a lot of you are probably going into the workforce and you're going to be working a variety of different positions. Might not necessarily be a mechanic or a technician working in a shop, but you might be working in a kitchen, you might be working on a construction site, you might be doing electrical work, whatever it may be. There are different safety regulations that protect you as a worker. We have two big organizations that we're going to talk about. The first one's going to be OSHA, or Occupational Safety Hazard Association. Now, what we're looking at with that is they assess different hazards in the workplace. So in the case of an automotive shop, we're looking at proper lift use, making sure that there's PPE readily available, making sure that all of their safety equipment, like we pointed out, the shepherd's hooks for hybrid safety, that those are in date and properly mounted and properly used, and that all other regulations in the shop are up to their standards. And their standards are constantly changing. So you may, go to work in a shop, the shop's like 40 years old and they're following standards that are a little bit out of date, or that their equipment has been grandfathered in because they don't expect the shop to completely revitalize itself. Or you could be working in a shop that's brand new and it's under the latest 2023 2024 guidelines for OSHA regulations. The other one that we're going to be looking at is the EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency. They're going to be covering the chemical side of things. So when we looked at the SP2, the first one is automotive service safety, and that's going to kind of fall in the realm of OSHA. And then the automotive pollution prevention, that's going to kind of fall in EPA. EPA not only is looking at obviously health and wellness for the surrounding environment, but it also affects you as a worker. Not properly draining or recycling engine oil, coolant, batteries, stuff like that. That is one of those things that it can have an adverse effect on you and your health. Now, what we're looking at and what the EPA is going to be covering is they're going to be covering a couple things. They're going to be looking at, what waste is generated in the shop. So when we're looking at servicing a vehicle, there's going to be the consumable fluids, filters, and other material media that's going to be considered waste. So we look at like tires, batteries, air filters, oil filters, fuel filters, the actual engine oil, coolant, brake fluid, all of that different chemicals are considered, EPA regulated waste. When we're also looking at components too. So if you have, just a basic component, if I have, this piston right here, this piston, yes, although it is aluminum, it does have trace carbon and oil on it, and that would be also considered hazardous waste at that point. When we look at like stormwater, prevention in terms of waste going down the storm drain, they're looking at, if you have a pile of old components in the corner and it's going down a unrestricted drain, that could be a potential for a violation. We're also looking at like even the oil containers. So the container that you use to store the engine oil is a big one that can lead to a violation. So there's a bunch of different things that they're going to be looking at. Now we're also going to be looking at the proper storage and recycling of those potential generated waste and the different means in doing that. And some of that it goes along with the shipping of it. How you properly ship and get those toxic materials out. So like a tire, for instance, anytime you go and get tires replaced at a shop, they're going to have a I think it's anywhere between $3 and $5 per tire recycling fee, and that's because the tire then has to be properly recycled because it is considered toxic waste because of the metal and the rubber that's in it. Now, great news with like a tire, for instance, is a tire is 100% recyclable. They can be used and transferred into different componentry. Any of you that have younger nieces and nephews or kids, and you've gone to a playground recently, they've gotten rid of like the sand and they've put like the foam or the rubber mat. That's all made of recycled tires, as an example. Engine oil too. Any quart of oil, on average, about a third of it is a recycled material. So we are pretty good at getting a longer life out of some of these materials once we've used them in the automotive industry. The other thing we're looking at too, that the EPA is trying to kind of mitigate is the cleanliness of the shop. Oil dripping down from different vehicles or equipment, which can be very, very difficult. I'll tell you with my experience in the shop, it takes a split second for you to like spill an oil container or coolant container, but it's going to take you many hours to clean it up because liquids like to permeate and get into places that are really difficult to get cleaned up. So it is one of those things that the proper drainage, storage, and transferring methods are key with that, and that it is something that they do look at. When we look at jobs in general, it's always funny. The automotive hobby world industry can be looked at as not very green, right? Because we're working on internal combustion powered vehicles that put out carbon and other greenhouse gases. However, when you look at like a position as a mechanic itself, a mechanic is tuning the vehicle up in terms of making the fuel and air mixture the best it can possibly be. We're fixing leaks, whether or not it's coolant or engine oil, so that that's not getting down into the streets and getting down into the waterways. So it is actually an extremely green job in the terms of, because we're making the vehicles as as efficient as we possibly can, because it's part of making a car have more horsepower and bringing it into a more drivable spec to where it's usable day to day. It is considered a green position at that point. So now when we're looking at different things that involve different chemicals, there's a couple different things we want to kind of classify them on. So there's obviously ignitability. So how fast can that thing light on fire? So if we're looking at gasoline, for instance, very, very ignitable. But if we have like a container of methanol, that's even more. That's half the energy of gasoline, but twice the boom. So we're looking at a scale of how ignitable that material is. And for the most part, usually best bet is all fluids on a vehicle, with the exception of the engine coolant or water, is flammable. All transmission fluids, gear oil can be, all of that stuff can be ignitable or combustible. It's just at what rate it is. Now, we utilize gasoline, for instance, as kind of our set point, because that's what it does. We add a little bit of air to that, or a whole lot of air, I should say, to that gasoline, and some spark, and then it creates a chemical reaction, and it expands and it explodes and it burns inside the engine. So we can look at that. But if you look at like diesel, for instance, right, diesel combustion engines, it does combust. However, it's combusting at very high pressures. So you can have an open container of diesel, you could light a match, and it's not going to light because it needs to be under great pressure, and diesel doesn't give off fumes like gasoline does. So again, we're looking at that rate of ignitability. Now, based on that, the EPA is going to have particular standards on these chemicals. Because they're super ignitable, they need to be stored in a container that can smother the flames. So usually a metal container with no vents, so that if there is a fire, if there's, if it spontaneously combusts, it can put itself out. Now we also have reactive. Now, reactive, this is going to kind of fall in line with some of the new refrigerants that we have. The one that comes to mind is R1234YF. So those of you that have a little bit of knowledge with automotive AC systems, they started out with R12. R12 was found to be too small of a molecule and did contribute to an environmental ozone depletion. We then went to R134, a little bit bigger molecule, but again, we're trying to make it to where we don't have as much of an issue, and they've gone to R1234YF. Now, the problem with R1234YF is it's very, very, very big molecule. It doesn't permeate through rubber as much. However, it is very reactive. This is one that's no joke. Any of you that are smokers, don't smoke over new vehicles anymore. I've had at the shop that I work at, we've had a car burned down because of there was a small pinhole leak in the condenser, which is the front heat exchanger for the AC system. And someone walked by with a lit cigarette and it burned. It burned the whole front of the car down. It totaled it. So it's one of those things that is very, very serious. When we service R1234YF refrigerant systems, there's a bunch of safety protocols that we do have to follow. The machines go through a mandatory leak and low pressure test to make sure that there's no issues. They also have a special detection die that's already built into all of these systems so that leaks can be found very, very quickly. Now, corrosive. Corrosive materials are either going to be very alkaline or they're going to be very acidic. Alkaline being more of a base, acidic being more of an acid. And when we're looking at that, either one of them can be bad. So when we look at, brake fluid, for instance, brake fluid, if it gets onto car paint, it will melt that car paint right off, almost instantly. And that's because it is very, very corrosive. It's also, if it melts off car paint, it's also going to not be super great for your skin or for the concrete floor or for your tools and equipment. So again, we have to make sure we're properly containing and recycling that. And when we look at recycling fluids, you might go to a shop and quite often everything gets mixed together. Most shops will separate water because they do get fined by the recycling company if there's water in the oil recycling containers, but transmission fluid, gear oil, brake fluid, power steering fluid, engine oil, it all gets mixed into one. Technically, EPA standards, they want brake fluid separate. They want that to be recycled in a separate manner and through a separate processes than other petroleum-based materials. And then we're looking at toxicity. So just the combustion process itself is very toxic. There's a lot of gases that come off of vehicles that are harmful for us to inhale. And we're looking at, making sure that a shop has proper ventilation for that. Even in general, even if you have a car that is tuned to the nines and it is running as optimally and efficient as possible, and you have a emission system that is taking care of all of the harmful emissions coming off of it, it still can asphyxiate you, right? We're still going to have carbon dioxide as one of the primary gases that comes out of a vehicle after the catalytic converter has done its thing, and that can cause you to perish after a while. So it is one of those things that we do want to make sure we're paying attention to that. As I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier too, oftentimes in the automotive world, things can be reused. There's a bunch of ways that this kind of goes in play. Again, most of the fluids are recyclable and reusable. All of those fluids we talked about, with the exception of engine coolant, is usually reusable. It can be cleaned, filtered, reformulated, and then reused and re-put back into service. That's not something that you could do at home necessarily as a shade tree mechanic, but it is something that if you get it to the proper recycler, it can be reused and it can have a second life, which is nice. We're being as efficient as possible with these materials. When we also look at a vehicle itself, with the exception of typically the foam and fabric seat, material, everything else is recyclable. So we're cutting up and disposing of vehicles right now, currently, and almost all of that stuff will be reused. It doesn't necessarily get put back in together as another automobile, usually because the metal is mixed with a variety of different grades in terms of some of it's mild steel, some of it's stainless, some of it's aluminum, so on and so forth. It usually gets put into an alloy blend, and it's used for other types of functions. The other thing that you're going to see quite a bit of is some of you that have worked on vehicles, you may have experienced when you go to the parts store, for instance, that they offer you a remanufactured part. Now, what remanufactured means is remanufactured indicates that a part was taken off of a vehicle, it got sent to a facility, it got checked for wear, it got measured, it got tested, all of the consumable portions of that component are been replaced, it's been cleaned, repackaged, and then gets resold. So then it can be used again. Oftentimes what you'll see is, engines, transmissions, differentials, brake calipers, brake master cylinders, stuff like that, alternators, PCMs, all of that stuff can be remanufactured. It's funny. So when I work at the dealership, I get customers often, they'll get towards the end of a warranty, and there's an attitude that they feel they're owed stuff with warranty, or that they're, they should be given something with it. And that can go along with, they have peace of mind that the vehicle is going to operate for a long period of time, and they'll go, oh, well, they'll make up big excuses on why they need a new motor put in their vehicle. And that is not a great idea on a lot of fronts. So first one is anytime you do, work on a vehicle, you can look at it as like major surgery. If you're going in and removing a motor, you're taking a lot of different systems off and unbolting a lot of different components to where vehicle might not be necessarily 100%. A good mechanic will be able to get it, you know, to that level. However, you still move stuff around to where the alignment might be off, the fitment of panels might be slightly off, and it might not be the same based off of how stuff is worn into itself. So it's always, there's a risk that something might come loose, or something might not be as true as it once was in terms of how it fits and everything. The other thing is oftentimes, you can have a motor that's at 59,000 miles and their warranty expires at 60, and they're very insistent on getting a motor. And if that goes through, the motors that we install at the dealership are not new. They're all remanufactured. It's very rare that I get a new engine. And usually if I do get a new engine, it's off the assembly line, and there's special circumstances that go along with that. So I could be putting a motor in a vehicle that the car and chassis might have, 59,000 miles on it, and the engine is remanufactured, but all of the major components inside of it could have 120,000 miles on it, which may or may not lead to it failing sooner than it otherwise would. There's also the old saying, they don't make them like they used to, and that saying is 110% true. They don't make cars the way they used to. They make cars way better now. When you look at, classic vehicles, and I have, my truck's a 1964. Well, Ford, when they came out with that truck, their mentality was you'd buy another one in another 1 to 2 years, and then that truck would get wadded up and thrown away. They did not care about the residual value of the vehicle or how it was built. Vehicles were very much a consumable item. That's why when you look at, vehicle design, every single year from like the 1920s on till up to about the late 70s, vehicles came out with new model years every year, and there was a new body style and there was new technology in it. Up until now, do we have a kind of a stagnation with that? And a big reason for that is cars are traveling much faster on roadways. They're traveling far greater distances on a given day. They're under far greater loads in terms of what we're hauling, in terms of either people or equipment inside of the vehicle, and they're expected to go a lot further. So, a vehicle back in the day, my 64 Ford, if it went 100,000 miles and it didn't need an engine rebuild, that was considered amazing. But oftentimes the motor would have to be gone through several times. in the lifetime of that vehicle. And at that point, yeah, we did have the mechanics and other trade people and machinists that could get it back up and running, and that wasn't as big of an issue. But nowadays, if you have a car that doesn't go 250,000 miles on an engine, it's considered, oh, that thing's a pile of junk, right? And I see it quite a bit. I'll see vehicles that have close to 300, 400,000 miles. It's the original engine, transmission, driveline in the vehicle. Sure, a bunch of the electrical sensors have failed over time and have been replaced, but they make cars really, really well now. And that's one of the things we really kind of take for granted is terms of how much better the manufacturing is when it comes to that. So again, when we're looking at the EPA, that's kind of one of those things that kind of falls in line with all of that info. Kind of a little bit of a asterisk that I want to put on the EPA is typically you as a mechanic or a technician, you do have to follow the EPA guidelines and rules, but it's the shop overall that has to abide by them and work with the EPA to make sure they're in regulation. Now, that being said, before I get on to OSHA, I know I skipped ahead a slide. For those of you that are working on your vehicle at home, please, 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 please make sure you're taking the effort to recycle engine oil, coolant, so on and so forth. Don't try to dump stuff down the drain. I know some people have the trick of, oh, you just flush it down the toilet, and don't do that. If you get caught, the way that it works is the EPA will send out a cleaning crew that goes through and cleans up what toxic waste was spilled. They then send you the bill as the accused person, and it can be anywhere between $10,000 to $50,000 and up. And some of that stuff, if it gets linked to it got out to the ocean, the sky's the limit on how much they can charge you for it. So please do your best to make sure you're recycling all of that stuff. On top of that, in terms of like visibility, the automotive hobby slash industry as a shade trees type thing where you're doing it at home is very much heavily under attack. And, a lot of people will want to blame a political party, and it's not. When you look down on it, it's actually in the community based. So you're looking at the biggest enemy to those of you having project cars and being able to work on your cars at home is going to be the HOA that you live in, or the regulatory body that controls the complex that you live in. There's very few neighborhoods around Orange County that don't have some sort of neighborhood watch or HOA homeowners association group that will have people that don't want that. And very often you might have a neighbor that wants no auto repair done at all in the neighborhood because it brings down property values and is a bad look for the area. So definitely make sure you're on the up and up with that stuff, so that way that you're not getting yourself into trouble. You're not making it harder for yourself. I've definitely, when I was younger and we would be working on vehicles late at night at friend's house or my house, we'd get the cops called on us all the time. Just because we were working on vehicles, which is, a bummer because, we were not doing anything necessarily that we shouldn't have been doing. We were a little bit noisy, but we're working on our vehicles in our driveway. Try to be a good ambassador to the hobby and to the industry in that right. Don't make it worse for everyone. Now, when we're looking at OSHA sets and enforces a bunch of these safety standards in the workplace. And what they'll have is they'll have a particular regulation. So I have 3 examples here. So, eye and face protection. The employer shall ensure that each affected employee uses appropriate eye or face protection when exposed to eye or face hazards from fine particles, molten metal, liquid chemicals, acids, or caustic liquid chemical gases or vapors, and or potential injury from light radiation. So you're looking at that, the employer that you're working for has to make sure that there's proper protective equipment for your eyes. And that can vary. So, there's for potential light radiation. So if you're looking at, if you're a welder, you have to have the proper welding mask with the proper shade rating, or you're using a torch, same thing, up to, if you're working in a general shop and there could be something that chemical or material that flies, you need to make sure that you have the proper safety glasses that will protect your eyes in that manner. Now, if you're getting employed by a facility, so if you have a facility that is paying you to be there, then they're required to provide you with the PPE, and it needs to be readily available and easily accessible, and also traded out on a regular basis. Safety glasses, obviously, they get scratched and they wear out, and they do need to be regularly looked at and taken care of. Now, OSHA has an immense amount of different, regulations that go along with it. And then they have revisions that go along with that as well, or addendums that go along with it. And it's constantly changing. The employer is responsible for letting you know all of these OSHA regulations. Some of you may, if you can think back, or if you're working somewhere, go look in the break room, right? Typically, there's going to be posters up on the wall. They're going to be super fine print that are going to be, occupational safety regulations, and those will all be on the wall. And they're supposed to have new ones I think it's every 2 years, but usually it's about annually. If there's any updates, it's pertinent for your work area, you have to change the posters out. And you're supposed to have a safety coordinator that is involved with the operations of that particular facility, and that may involve that they're checking to make sure you as an employee are wearing proper PPE, or that equipment's being used in the shop is operating correctly and being used correctly, or that the shop is laid out in a way that there's not any issues. So, big reason why we have all of our airlines, electrical, connections and everything hanging from the ceiling in the shop is because that's something that's a violation. If something is dangling down on the ground, it's a trip hazard. Same thing with why, what we're going to be using. Some of you may have noticed we have 20, 30 plastic carts all stacked in the end. We utilize those for equipment. You can't put stuff on the floor because, again, it's a tripping hazard. You need to make sure that stuff is clear and off the ground and not a potential risk for those working in the area. Now, I brought this up during the shop tour. We showed where we have our STS sheets mounted. Now, the STS sheets, these are safety data sheets. What they are is they are a form that is filled out for every shop chemical that is used in the shop, and they regularly need to be updated. And that is typically going to be the safety officer, shop foreman type position in a shop. So we have our senior lab tech take care of that. Anytime a new chemical comes in, he fills out and adds that to our STS binder. Now, what they're kind of going to go over is they're going to go over multiple sections. So they're going to go in the way that it can be identified. Now, it is a regulation that all chemicals have to be in easily read containers. So like, my Hydro Flask right here, if this had fluid in it, if it's not marked with what that fluid is, that would be in violation to the STS sheets requirement. So it has to be properly identified. On that STS sheet, then we go over the hazards, what its ingredients are, what its breakdown is, what the first aid, firefighting, accidental release, handling and storage, so on and so forth, all of that stuff that's important. Now, if you're at a shop, or if this is a position that you want to be in, or if you are looking at the chemicals inside your own personal garage and you go like, oh, I kind of probably need to know how to treat that, you can do a quick Google search and already made STS sheet will come up. So, for example, we put in WD-40 and we Google search that, and you can see right off the bat, there's safety data sheets that come off straight from the WD-40 company. So you can then, hit print and put that into your binder, and you're ready to go. You don't have to hand fill it out or be reading all of the fine print on the back of the chemical container to try to identify that. The chemical companies are required to give that to you. So that is something that is very beneficial in that manner. Now, first aid. This is going to be one of those things that you definitely want to protect yourself. We're going to talk about PPE here in a couple slides. I want you all to learn from my mistake. A mistake that I made being a young individual in the automotive world is I didn't wear gloves that often. I didn't like that I didn't have the dexterity, right? That I couldn't, kind of, feel stuff with the end of my fingers. It often is said that, mechanics have, 10 additional eyes and they're all on the end of your hand. And there is situations where you're all tucked up underneath the vehicle and you can't see the fastener that you're trying to loosen, and you see it through your hands. And I got really in the bad habit of not wearing gloves, and that's done a couple things. It's first allowed for chemicals to seep into my hand, and I have a couple permanent chemical burns in my palm that no matter what I do, they're stuck in there. There's stuff permanently embedded in there, as well as it prevents injuries. Now, first aid and avoiding bloodborne pathogens is going to be a big one. So along with safe glove usage on a shop, if you're assisting a fellow technician or mechanic that has gotten hurt, you need to obviously be wearing gloves yourself. I've been hurt in a variety of different ways, all sorts of different stuff. Your hands get smashed, cut, lacerated, burned, you name it, it's going to probably happen to you in the automotive world. Stuff is very, very sharp. When we look at componentry on an engine, everything is finely machined so that it is, at a really tight tolerance, but it's not meant to where it's going to be safe for you necessarily to touch. You can grab it and it will eventually cut or lacerate you very, very easily. Now, I am going to give you kind of an inside tip. The first aid kit that I keep with me, and I have it in my desk, is this guy right here. I'll be perfectly honest with you. Electrical tape works really good as a bandage. It's water resistant. It doesn't leave a nasty residue on your skin, and it tends to stay in place for the full workday. So I always have a specific roll of electrical tape that I use for lacerations. And on any given day, you get one or two a day, and you cause yourself to have a little bit of leak, and you need to fix it really quick. You need to wrap some tape around it. However, that being said, I want to make sure that it is very well known that you are taking the time to clean out and follow all first aid practices. Make sure you're getting everything out of that cut so that it does not become infected, and you don't have to seek additional medical attention because of bad practices with that. So make sure fully clean it with water, alcohol, hydrogen peroxide, whatever you need, as long as you're not allergic to it, to clean out that wound and to get it taken care of. The other thing to look at too is if you get into a situation where you need stitches, so you get a deep enough laceration to where you either need staples or sutures to kind of close the wound up. Time is of the essence. If you wait for too long, they can't do anything about it, and then the healing process can take far longer. I had the unfortunate situation where I went down the middle of my index finger with a bandsaw. I was cutting something and it caught, and my finger went into the blade, and I went, when I had x-rays done, it went 10 millimeters into the end of my finger bone, which is quite a bit on how far it went. Now, at that point, I ended up, I had some other obligations that I had to do before I went to the emergency room, one of which was picking up my daughter and making sure she was safe and back home. By the time I got to the ER, it was probably 6 to 7 hours later, and they're like, well, it's stopped bleeding. There's nothing really we can do. They did, though, however, when they took x-rays and found that it went into the bone, they were very much, you have to have a tetanus shot. Tetanus shot is, again, going to try to reduce the risk of infection. You're supposed to get one about every 10 years. In the automotive world, if you go get stitches, you probably need one. And even if you, usually the rule of thumb that I've been told by medical professionals, if you can't remember the last time you had one, you probably need one. So definitely keep that in mind. And we want to make sure that we're, again, not spreading blood and effectively everyone's cooties everywhere. So bandage yourself up and use safe practices if you're helping a fellow mechanic or technician out. Wear gloves and be safe in that manner. Now, lifting, the other thing that's going to be really, really important for you, not only just as a mechanic, but just as a human being altogether, is proper lifting and carrying. And this kind of goes beyond working on vehicles. This goes kind of just with day-to-day life. Now, one of the things I brought up yesterday is I brought up, we're using the lifts, and the lifts are a game changer in a lot of ways. So I will deploy the lift arms and lift a vehicle up regardless of if I have to get under it. And the reason being is I'm fairly tall. If I can take a vehicle and bring it up to a working height where I'm not leaned over, but instead I'm sitting up tall and sitting up straight or standing up straight, that will then allow me to have less strain on my back. The other thing that I do is I go full Shamu, and I will put down a cover to not damage the paint of the vehicle, but I will put all of my weight and lay on a fender or lay on a radiator cowl and work on a vehicle that way. That way, again, you're putting less strain on your hips and your spine, and you're taking some of that load off. Because again, a lot of the stuff you're going to be doing is going to be, you know, very, very strenuous and difficult. And we want to make sure we're keeping our back health as good as possible. Obviously, keeping good positioning too, making sure you're paying attention to if you're overextending. So if you're having to reach super high, go on your tippy toes and grab something, you might want to adjust or get something to be able to increase your elevation to prevent you from being overextended that way. Pushing and pulling, when we're looking at that, that's generally preferred. Pushing is generally preferred than pulling. Pushing allows you to use larger muscle groups than pulling does, and you're less likely to get strain and injury. Now, when you're looking at, utilizing a wrench and you want to, if you're pushing or pulling it away from you, there's risks both ways. So if you're pushing it away from you, you do run the risk if you lose grip, you might hit and punch something and do some damage to your digits that way. The other thing you can have is if you're pulling towards you and it comes loose, you can very easily punch yourself in the face. Ask me how I know. I've done it multiple times where you give yourself quite the zinger right in your face. So again, you just need to be careful. Just be mindful of all of your movements. Make sure you're not doing anything that is at risk of getting hurt. And then also making sure you have really good handholds. This is kind of tough in the automotive world because componentry isn't necessarily designed for lifting. And oftentimes you have to have special attachments or straps to be able to lift a component safely. You can't just, grab it. So, when we're lifting different pieces of equipment or components, it is important to make sure you're doing good handholds and get help if need be. Definitely ask for help if that's the case. If you're lifting something that is kind of awkward or bulky or super heavy, get help with that. Now, our safety glasses. So I kind of already went over safety glasses. Now, our safety glasses that we're going to wear, we want to make sure that they are Z87 approved. Now, what that means is Z87 is a safety standard for shatter resistance. It's a particular test that proves that these won't shatter or break at a particular pressure. Now, the way that you can tell that, so my safety glasses right here, I'm not going to be able to show you on camera because the camera for the computer is not very bad or not very good. It's fairly bad, but the on the arm of the ear holder right here, it's stamped with Z87 plus. So that means it exceeds the Z87 approval. Oftentimes it can be on the legs of the glasses, or it'll be down in the bottom of the lens somewhere. You need to make sure that the safety glasses are Z87 approved. Now, safety glasses, though, although they do provide protection from stuff getting on your face, they don't necessarily prevent chemicals from getting around, right? There's a gap below and around. And although these are really nice form-fitted glasses that do go contour to my face pretty closely, they do still allow for chemicals to get around. And that's where you may need to have goggles. Now with goggles are going to prevent chemicals or dust. And a lot of times when we're looking at like body work or sanding, body filler or paint, you need to have goggles so that we don't have any of that getting into your eyes as well. And that's going to be one of the kind of crucial things. And there's two different uses with that. You can have safety goggles that not only will seal against your face, but will also be Z87 approved, and they can kind of be dual duty. The downside of that is you need to make sure you're doing the proper anti-fogging technique. If you dilute, it's like 3-to-1 Dawn dish soap with distilled water. That is a nice formula that you can put on the inside lens of goggles, rub it through, and then allow it to dry. With a like a microfiber cloth and dry it all up. That will then allow you to not have them fog up. You breathing will fog up the glasses. Coming off of COVID, we're all aware of, if any of you had glasses and they fog up with a mask. So it's the same thing with goggles. And there is usage for that. Now a face shield, that's that device down here at the bottom with the blue cap. A face shield is used in conjunction with safety glasses. They have to be used with both. Now, what the face shield is going to do is you're using that for any type of grinding or machine finishing, where you're using a power tool that potentially can be removing material, and that's to prevent anything from getting on your face, and it's an extra barrier. So you have your safety glasses on, and then you have the shield that goes over. So if there's any sparks or wire, wheel, or media that can potentially hit you in the face, it won't, and it won't get up your nose. Or a good one will go around and somewhat block your ears. Understanding the eye wash stations. So we showed the two different style eye wash stations we have in our shop. We have the pull down water one, and we have the little saline bottle. Having an understanding of how those work is really important. They're supposed to be tested every week. So every week someone's supposed to go over, hit the button. So this little guy right here that, you're going to give it a high five. You're going to press that down, and then all four of these nozzles will spray water up. This is the eye wash station that I prefer because it's low pressure, but it does do a good job of really flushing your eye out. Also, the rule of thumb, if you do get something in your eye, it's almost always 15 minutes of flushing it under clean water. So we do want to make sure that we are following that practice if that is the case. The bottles that we have, the saline bottles, those are meant for if you pull the twist off correctly and you're spraying it in your eye, it's meant for 15 minutes of use. Same thing with these guys. Some of these guys will have timers. For the most part, they don't. It's just like a regular sink. You just hit it, and it's gonna be going for a little bit. Now, respiratory system protection. So this is going to be protection against inhaling different chemicals. The big one with this is going to be if any of you go into paint and body work, you do need to make sure that you have a proper respirator. Much like safety glasses, respirators have to be provided by the employer, and they have to be regularly serviced. So this type of respirator, we have the two filters on the outside here. Those filters have a set lifespan. They also have a set storage requirements. The more that they're exposed to oxygen, the shorter their life is. So when you're not using the respirator, you're supposed to properly clean it. You clean the inside area that goes against and seals your face with alcohol, allowing it to evaporate and dry fully. And then you need to have this sealed up in a container with that will not get permeated by air. And that will allow these filters to last a much longer life. The filters are serviceable. They click 90 degrees. They come off, and then you can put new ones on. If you're doing a lot of paint and body work, you're kind of supposed to change these every couple days or every week. But if you do proper, storage with them, they can last a little bit longer. Now, in other cases, you might not need that full respirator. You might need, a dust mask, and that's to not breathe in heavy particles. Breathing in heavy particles is going to be one of those things that can be very detrimental to you in the long term, and we want to try to avoid at all costs. So, even looking at like if you're doing woodworking, you do need to wear a dust mask so that you're not breathing in that wood pulp and potentially having that wreck your lungs. So definitely look into the regulations with that. On average, basic mechanic in a shop that's just doing maintenance and repair, there's not much respiration use that you need to use unless you start to use it for grinding or so on and so forth. Now gloves come in a couple different types and styles. Now, when we look at the work gloves on the top here, those are great for working in the garden. You can get them for, your dad or your uncle that has a prized garden. Don't wear these in the shop. They're pretty junk. Definitely get like a mechanic style glove. Get a glove that is going to be form fitting. So I like these fabric with rubber impregnated style gloves. They do fit really tight and firm around your hand. The big difference between a glove like this and the work glove on the top there is the work glove is made of really thick leather. and it won't be cut very easily, but you have no dexterity and you don't have as much movement. The nice thing with these gloves is they're relatively thick, but you still have full movement. You can use each individual finger, and you have a little bit more dexterity. The advantage to these two is with them being rubber lined on the middle. And if you're grabbing components, oily components, so on and so forth, it's not going to get in and get absorbed in the glove material to where the work gloves on top they will get oil and chemicals absorbed into them, and then they become unusable, and they become soggy and wet, and they get really uncomfortable after a little bit of time. So try to avoid those ones. If you're going to be doing any welding, you need to make sure you're getting the proper gloves for welding. There's a big difference between MIG and arc welding. Those gloves are a lot longer, and they have a big bib on them that goes along with it, or TIG welding gloves. TIG welding gloves, again, we want to have a lot better dexterity because we're going to be filling, using the filler rod to kind of send that into the puddle of the weld. We want to make sure that we have the ability to use that. The other thing with welding gloves is any long-term welding exposes you to UV light. So it's also protecting you not only against the heat or laceration, but it's also protecting you against the light radiation and potentially getting sunburned. I have, when I was working as a sheet metal fabricator for a little bit, we were doing some welding. I had gloves that didn't fully cover my wrist, and my work jacket was a little bit too small, and I would get bands where I'd get sunburn, and it's not a fun feeling. It's a pretty good sunburn if that's the case. So we want to make sure that we're not having that be the case. Now, disposable gloves. These are just going to be traditional rubber gloves. They're, can be made of a couple different types of material. They are going to have different sizing that goes along with them. The thing with the rubber gloves is these are disposable. You need to make sure you're disposing of them properly. If they're fully oil soaked, you need to make sure they're going in the right container. But what you're looking for in terms of glove is you want to make sure that they fit nice. Too tight or too large can be detrimental. The way that you're going to determine that is by measuring the angle across your palm with a quick ruler and judging that based off of each individual manufacturer of the gloves measurement scale. Rubber gloves, again, they're hit or miss on whether people like them or not. It's usually a good idea to make sure that you are wearing these as much as possible. If I were you, I would start to get used to wearing them. I'd find a brand that you like and kind of stick with them, because there is differences between different brands, and find some that work for you. Now, proper footwear in a shop. This is really, really paramount. As a mechanic technician, you're going to be on your feet the whole day, and you're going to be straining on those feet the whole day. Now, proper work boots that are chemical resistant and oil resistant and slip resistant are key. Now, there is the debate on whether or not the steel-toed is good or non-steel-toed is preferred. My opinion, I wear steel-toed boots, and here's why. The argument is that if you drop if 1,000-pound drops on your boot with a steel-toed boot versus a regular shoe, they're going to have to cut your toes off, because it's going to cut the end of your toes off, and it'll damage your foot. Well, the reality is, if 1,000 pounds falls on your foot on a regular shoe, you're still going to have probably irreversible damage to your foot regardless. But what a steel-toed boot will protect you from is dropping something that's 30 or 40 pounds on your foot. Believe you me, if anyone here has had, where they've had a fingernail, get bruised and they have to drill out to reduce the pressure, it's not a fun feeling. Your toes are even more sensitive. Your big toe is one of those ones that it kills. So that's why you need to have, proper footwear. And I prefer steel-toed boot or composite soled boots. When we're looking at construction boots versus automotive-based boots, there's a couple different kind of breakdowns with it. So the boot that I have pictured here, this is like a carpentry strut tile boot. It's not a good example for automotive, but it was the best diagram that kind of showed the breakdown. You'll have the composite or the steel toe in the front, but oftentimes automotive ones will also have a band back behind your heel. And that is for protecting the back of your heel, because a lot of times guys will, kind of kick backwards to move rack arms out. And so that protects you against that. The other thing is automotive boots tend to be more chemically resistant than regular like carpentry boots or work boots, which usually does increase the cost. So it's funny, you can always tell someone that's new in the shop. Most automotive oil resistant boots, they come black. You're working on cars with oil leaks, they're going to become black. But you'll see the guy with tan or red boots, and it's like, oh, okay, you went cheap on your boots. They're like, oh no, I just really like the color. Well, give it 3 weeks, and the boot's not that color anymore. You can do treatment and stuff to them, but it's not usually that easy. I also prefer high tops. I don't like the low tops or the slip-ons. A lot of individuals use the slip-ons, and you can get slip-on composite or safety toe boots. I don't like those. I've had some pretty major ankle injuries in the past, and I prefer having the support and structure of a boot to wrap around the ankle. The other thing that I would make sure that you are getting to is always get an extra pair of shoelaces. I've had many situations where like I've moved a rack arm or I've been working in the shop and the lace gets cut and then the boot's not wearable anymore. So keep an extra set of shoelaces in your toolbox or get them regularly changed out and keep some of the old ones available for you. Now, ear protection. This is one of those things that's very underrated in the shop. Ear protection comes in a couple different forms. When we're looking at average ear protection, usually the foam filled or the little rubber filled ear pods are going to be okay. Now that doesn't mean that the AirPods that you're using to listen to music, those aren't ear protection. You need to have actual, rated for noise cancellation ear protection. Now, I have this in bold right here. So use of earmuffs or earplugs in a work area that exceeds 85 decibels. That is a test question that you will see on SP2 and on some of the other tests. So bear that in mind. 85 decibels is what you need to have proper ear protection for. Now, you may need to use the ear muffs. Personally, I like ear muffs because they're quick. You can have them hanging on your toolbox and you can just throw them on real quick, and they work really, really well at drowning out any noise. Or the whining of the coworker next to you. And believe you me, you become a mechanic. Mechanics like to whine and complain. So it's kind of nice to just be like, oh, hold on, I'm doing something. And you put the earmuffs on, and then you cancel out their complaining of everything. Now, when it comes to ear protection, it's kind of a mix of things that are going on. It's a mix of what that sound level is, how long or what the duration of that sound is, and then the distance. So if you were super close as a very high sound level for a very long time, you're going to be doing immediate damage to your ears. I spent most of my youth going from punk rock show to punk rock show at really crappy dive bars that they would put way too big of a PA system and way too small of a bar and get my ears blasted out, and I'd leave the show, and you'd have that ringing in your ear. That ringing is permanent damage to your eardrum. Once that ringing goes away, you cannot hear that tone anymore. That tone is gone. So enjoy it while it lasts, because once that tone is gone, it's gone forever. And that is a immediate hearing loss. So we do want to make sure that we are paying attention to that, and we're keeping track of that. You can download an app on your phone that will read the average decibel rating for the work area. And again, 85 is the level that is considered maximum. When we look at certain regulations just for vehicles exhaust, we exceed that because it's depending on the area, it's 89 decibels or 91 decibels, which is already exceeding damage to your ears. So it kind of makes sense why there's those laws. I don't necessarily agree with them at all, but it is, there's reasoning for that. Typically, if it sounds too loud, it's too loud, and you need to have ear protection on. So you can utilize the free app if you want. But for the most part, if something is really loud or harsh or, against your ears, it is, and you need to look into potentially getting ear protection. Now, it is one of those things when we do use ear protection, we want to make sure that we're properly using them. If they're the foam earplug inserts, that you are putting them in your ear canal the proper way, and so they'll operate correctly. You need to make sure that you have it nice and tight in your ear. Oftentimes they can be side specific. You can get right or left earplugs set up, and you need to make sure you're paying attention to that, and make sure that you have them as a good seal. For competition racing, we would have our drivers. They would have we'd get them custom molded earplugs, and they were dual duty. They'd be custom molded to one's ear, and we would put in a speaker so that they could use the race radio. So it would be wired to the radio system, and they would have that going right into their ear, and they would have a button and a mic at the bottom of their helmet that would be able to communicate with us on the wall. But it also served as it would completely fill their ear up to try to avoid them getting hearing damage from the engine. Primarily, it was the drivetrain that actually made the most noise. The transmission and diffs, especially on straight cut diffs, that is making a majority of the noise that allows people uh, to get ear damage. So it is one of those things that we do want to make sure we're paying attention to that. You want to make sure the big rule of thumb is that you can if it muffles your voice when you're talking and you don't think you can fully hear, you have your earplugs in correctly. Now, fire extinguishers. This is a big one. I have had many instances where I've had to put out fires in shops or on cars, and it is one of those things you need to make sure you're understanding what has now caught on fire and how to properly put it out. Fire extinguishers will have different ratings, and we need to make sure we're looking at figuring out the source of the fire, try to put the fire out the best possible way. Now, when we look at fire extinguishers for a vehicle, personally, all of my personal vehicles have fire extinguishers in them. It is one of those things, you can catch an automotive fire quick enough to where it will do very little damage to the vehicle, and you can put it out relatively quickly. You do need to have an understanding of where that fire is coming from, and we do need to use a strategy to putting that fire out. Now, with what I have pictured right here, that Pontiac Grand Prix, it's a goner. If the fire is like that, there's no saving it. A 5 or 10 pound fire extinguisher probably isn't going to be able to put that out. As you can see with this fire, we can see that there's already kind of a pool of a chemical below, engine oil, plastic, whatever it may be, that's combusting, and it's already at a high enough temperature to where it's probably doing damage. What you'd want to do instead is make sure there's no occupants inside of the vehicle, they're out, and that everyone is free and clear of the car as it burns down. Car fires, they can go out of control within seconds. So it is one of those things you do want to make sure you're paying attention to that. My time attack team, oddly enough, all of us are banned. And not only are we banned, but the racing organization is banned from the Long Beach Grand Prix. In 2006, right before the IndyCar race, they ran time attack cars, kind of as like a warming the crowd up type deal as people are finding their seats. And our car caught on fire on turn 7 and delayed the IndyCar race by 30 minutes. So we were not very graciously asked to never come back. My time attack car that we're a part of, it's a very, very finicky car, and it catches on fire on a fairly regular basis, oddly enough. So it is one of those things that you do want to be very, very careful of. Now, we're going to have 4 different main classifications in terms of how a fire extinguisher is going to work. Oftentimes, you can have a fire extinguisher that is multi-rated, and typically they're ABC or a B and a C rated. But our A-type fires, this is going to be able to put out generalized fires. So think of like a campfire, paper, wood, plastic, stuff like that. conventional temperature that it's burning at. Although it says lower temperature, it's still obviously burning. But we're looking at just kind of basic, like trash bin fire type stuff. Type B fire is going to be for an oil or grease fire. Now, don't ever put water in an oil or grease fire. It makes it exorbitantly worse. It usually expands it at a greater rate. So a fire extinguisher that can be able to put out uh, a grease type fire, an oil type fire, needs to be able to quench it. These typically are powdered extinguishers at this point, so the propellant coming out is going to be in a powder form, so that it can kind of smother the fire, and get it put out. Type C, this is going to be for electrical fires. Now, oddly enough, electrical fires, we want to make sure we have a non-conductive agent going on to the source to put it out. However, first responders are trained when they come across like an electrical fire, like a lithium-ion battery pack, is to just flood it with as much water as you possibly can. And the reasoning for that is, yes, it is conductive, and yes, it can cause shock. But the big reasoning for that is you're trying to. That's the best way to get no oxygen going to that fire whatsoever, and to cool it as quick as possible. Electrical fires happen typically when a component gets too hot, and when it's gotten too hot, it then can melt its insulation or its surrounding material, and then that can combust. And then the last fire is one of the most dangerous fires. And for those of you that have served in the military, you're very, very aware of this. This is a heavy metal fire, a combustible metal fire, a type D. These will have special fire extinguishers. So when you're looking at like thermite, magnesium, lithium, all of these type of fires, they fall under a heavy metal fire. Not gonna lie, when stuff like this burns, there's not a lot you can do. If you have a fire extinguisher and you can get it done quick, that's usually the best bet. I did know an individual that I worked with racing, that he was machining magnesium. He was refacing magnesium wheels. So he was cutting the hoops off and getting ready to make a one-piece wheel into a three-piece wheel. And it overheated on his lathe and it caught on fire. They had to bury the lathe. It actually melted the lathe because heavy metal fires burn at a very, very high temperature, thousands and thousands of degrees. They had to take the lathe out and bury it. And that was the only thing that they could do to get that fire to be put out. So it is one of those things that is very, very serious, and make sure we have the properly rated fire extinguisher for what we're doing. The other thing too is, if a human being is on fire, you don't blast them with a fire extinguisher, at least in their face. If you do, make sure you're doing it, below their chest. Fire extinguishers, anyone that's B, C, or D rated, is going to typically smother or take the oxygen out of the air, and that's going to not be very good for that person's health. So we want to make sure we're using fire blankets, or you do the stop, drop, and roll, and kind of put the fire out that way. I have been on fire, and I have had to do that, where you basically beat the shit out of you to get the fire out, because again, you don't want to really blast yourself with that. If someone's getting burned too, if you hit them with a fire extinguisher, you want to make sure you clean off that propellant as soon as possible, because that can get permeated into their skin. So fires are no joke. We want to make sure that we're being very, very aware of that, and very, very safe along those lines. Now, lift training. So I brought up the lift functions and how the lift is going to work, and the safety aspects with that. The other thing to understand, though, is all aspects of how the lift is going to function. Now, one of the things you'll notice is right above the control panel for the hydraulics of the lift, you're going to have stickers like this, which is meaning to make sure you understand all of the different lift requirements on the vehicle, and making sure you understand the warnings. We went over this in the live class, but we do want to make sure that we're not shaking the vehicle too much. We're making sure the vehicle is fully balanced. Definitely follow this warning up here in the right corner. If the car starts to fall, run away. No one is strong enough to prevent the car from falling. I have heard story of individuals where the car is falling, and they go and they grab the reverse bumper to try to put weight on it, and they get flung up. and they get tossed like they're in a catapult. So definitely run. Don't try to grab it. Don't try to push it up. Don't try to do any of that stuff. It will crush you. We want to make sure that we are being extremely safe with that because it is no joke. Again, we want to follow the ALI lift guidelines in terms of we want to make sure that we're lifting the vehicle based off the center of gravity. That's going to be dependent on whether or not it's front wheel drive or rear wheel drive. Again, I showed you in the ALI lift book where to look that up. Every single one of our lifts, when we come in next week, and I have you all do this live and in person on your own, we want to make sure that we're following that guideline and we're looking that up in the book. Now, I'm going to go over again because I know it'll be a week span in between us utilizing the lifts. I'm going to go through again and make sure that you all are savvy in how to use the lifts and kind of do another demo. And we'll also do a demo on properly using jack stands. You know, depending on the lifts too, if we look at like a 4-post drive-on lift, there's a couple things that we want to make sure we're paying attention to with these. Obviously, we don't have to worry about our lift points because it's lifting it based off the tire. We're effectively driving onto a road surface that will then go up in altitude. But we want to make sure the vehicle is stationary, that all 4 pillars are lifting up equally, and that the vehicle doesn't have the opportunity to roll down. So if you look at this 4-post lift, we have these yellow rectangles on the front. That's to prevent the vehicle from rolling forward. And the ramps in the back, they angle backwards to where the vehicle won't roll backwards. Now, I will give this. I did have to deal with this as a shop foreman. I'd never seen it before, ever, where someone tried driving backwards with the lift up in the air and they bent the ramp backwards bad enough to where the car then was stuck on the lift. And we actually had to do some shenanigans with a forklift to bend it back down and into place to get it to be flat again. And it was kind of an interesting situation. Now, as promised from last class, this was the one and only car that I've seen fall in the shop. So this is at the particular facility that I work at. This was a number of years ago at this point. This was right before I became a full-time instructor. This is when I was shop foreman there. So I, at the shop I work at, I got up to the shop foreman position, and I then resigned as shop foreman and went back down to a normal technician to become a full-time instructor here. This was literally the week that I was transitioning into being a normal mechanic. Now let me give you the breakdown on what happened with this. So this is a Jeep Gladiator, and as you can see, it's not on the rack arms anymore. I was over in my area of the shop, which is around 50, 60 yards away, and I can tell you the noise that this made when this fell, and this didn't even fall all the way on the ground, as you can see, was a noise that I've never heard before, but I instantly knew because I was working on a vehicle and my apprentice was in the bay next to me and we heard it and it was one of those like, oh shit, a car fell. You know, neither he or I had ever experienced it. And so we looked around the shop and I could see a technician had this happen. Now, technician was safe. He didn't get hurt. Thankfully, he was in the left front corner. So the vehicle fell around him, so which is really, really good because if it would have fallen on him, it would have killed him. But what had happened was they did not have the rack arms properly placed. Remember, I brought up those pins, that those pins were locked. The pin wasn't locked, and the front arm right here swung out. And when it swung out, it caused the vehicle to drop, and it pushed the other arm away. Now, this back arm on the right here that we can see, it's still somewhat in place because that pin did lock. Now, I do want you to note, again, you know how we brighten up, they don't make cars the way they used to. The thing that's holding this entire vehicle up, now this is a 6,500 pound vehicle, is yes, that rear passenger glass. That rack arm is firm against the glass there, and the glass was what was holding that vehicle up from falling further. Now, if it would have broken the glass, it probably would have gotten caught on the door frame and would have gone another foot or two. However, it was very impressive to see that that glass was actually holding a large amount of the vehicle's weight up. The other 2 rack arms got wrapped up in the frame and the exhaust and the front suspension. We were able to bring this back down. I ended up getting our forklift and using the forklift to lift up our back right tire here, and as I lifted up, we had someone lower the rack arm down, and we were able to bring the vehicle back down onto the ground. But oftentimes, if it falls fully on the ground, they're not very easy to right. Again, the big safety thing with this is you don't want to be under the vehicle. This is extremely dangerous. So this is why when we are doing our lift exercising next week, I want you all to come and check with me on the rack positioning. So definitely this is one of those things we need to take seriously every time we work on the vehicle. We don't want this to happen to any of you all. And hopefully you can go your full mechanics career and never have a vehicle fall. And that is my ultimate goal, is that none of you get seriously injured ever, and none of you ever have to experience some of these bad situations. Now, we did let the customer know in this kind of situation. Again, this is kind of going a little bit into ethics in terms of being a mechanic. You do want to operate in an ethical manner. You want to make sure that you are being fully honest with the owner of the vehicle and going, hey, look, we made a mistake. We're going to correct it. We did all the body work and we fixed it. The vehicle was far from totaled. It needed a right front fender liner, and a one suspension leak, and then exhaust. Oddly enough, that back glass, it didn't even scratch it. We replaced it regardless because don't want to push our luck. But it needed very little repair work, and the customer actually was perfectly fine with it. Once we got it back down on the ground, we told him the truth, told him what happened, and he came down. He looked at the vehicle, and we provided him with a rental car the entire time we were doing the repairs, and we told him we'll have it as soon as we possibly can. And he was reasonable with that. And most people will be, if you're honest with this kind of situation and you don't try to hide it, they're usually pretty reasonable. So just keep that in mind. The automotive industry gets a really bad rap as everyone's kind of liars and cheats. A good piece of advice that I got from a service manager a while back is you just don't lie to customers, because then you got to try to remember that lie. And if you've made multiple lies to multiple customers, you got to keep track of them. So if you're telling the truth and you're being honest with them, then you already know that to be the case. So in this situation, it worked out. It could have been a lot worse though, and it could have resulted in that technician getting killed. So we do want to make sure we're paying very close attention to that. Now, when utilizing jack stands, we are going to go over this because a vast majority of you will be using jack stands at home. I still do use jack stands at work. I work on any of the large vehicles that come in, and we don't necessarily always have the ability to lift them up on the in shop lifts. So we do use jack stands. My 64 Ford, I fully built that in a one-car garage on jack stands. So we want to make sure that we are having an understanding of how they operate and safe standards for that. Now, the AOI lift book, that would operate in the same manner of lift of jacking points for floor jacks. The key thing difference with that though is we do want to make sure we're chalking the wheel. So step one, as you can see in this kind of breakdown, is we're going to chalk the wheel. What that's going to do is, as we lift the vehicle, because you're usually lifting it either from the left or the right or the front or the back individually first, it will prevent it from trying to roll. So we're going to have the parking brake on, vehicle in park, or in gear stick shift, and then the wheel firmly chalked again, so it doesn't want to pivot or roll back and forth. That will allow us to not have the vehicle fall on jack stands. Now, I have had cars fall on floor jacks. Typically it's going to be the spare tire jack, and we kind of want to avoid that. We do want to make sure we're purchasing good floor jacks and jacking equipment, and we'll go over that in the tool lecture when we go over chapter 6 and here in a couple weeks. Now, airbags. This is one of those things that as a mechanic you want to make sure you're paying attention to. Now, as my automotive career went forward, I brought up that I only had one car fall off a lift. I have had many airbag deployments in the shop. In fact, we've totaled many cars, unfortunately. And as shop foreman, I was always the one that had to be the bearer of bad news to the customer and the service manager if this is the situation. Airbags are no joke. Legitimately, airbags, when you look at diagnostics with them, they call them squibs. Again, those of you that are in the know, a squib is what's known as an explosive device control, or the control device for an explosive. Now, they will be extremely dangerous. Uh, Airbags are designed to deploy and allow for the safe operation of a person while they're in a seatbelt and properly seated in the driver's seat. Now, you're probably wondering to me, like, well, how do you have an airbag deploy if you're in a shop and it's stationary? Very, very easy. If you mess with the G sensor of the airbag control module, or if you do too much of a shock to one of the impact sensors or the airbag itself with an impact gun, you can cause the airbag to deploy. I did have a technician, and I absolutely love the dude to death. He's one of my really good friends. I worked with him for close to 14 years before he moved back east to take care of his family. That's where he's from. He's from the Carolinas, and he moved back to take care of his mother-in-law while she got a little bit elderly. He had two instances where he had airbags deploy. He also blew up a door, which was kind of cool. That one was unique because I'd never seen it before. But on both situations, he was working on the center console of the vehicle, and he had the battery connected, and he used one of them. He used an impact gun, and it was enough of a shock to where it deployed the airbags, and he was in the vehicle, and he was sideways to the airbag, and the airbag hit him in the ear, and he actually we had to take him to urgent care for that one because he did physically get hurt. The second one was he was working on the parking brake cables, and again, battery connected. He moved the occupant control module, which on most vehicles is always in the center console of the vehicle. It's either below the center console or right below the radio and everything mounted to the floorboard. And he turned it over while it was still plugged in. The vehicle thought it was getting rolled over, and it deployed all of the side curtain airbags. And again, doing considerable damage. When you have the side curtain airbags deploy, that usually destroys the headliner as well as it deploys all of the seatbelt pretensioners. When the airbags deploy, it damages the wiring harness and it damages the wiring. So it's not just replacing the airbag, it's also replacing the wiring harness that goes along to it, which could be the entire body harness of the car, the module, and any jumper harnesses that go along with it. So it can be a very expensive repair. Had another technician do that where they set off the front airbags on an older Jeep. It was an older Grand Cherokee. I believe it was like a 99 Grand Cherokee. The vehicle's value on Kelley Blue Book was like $1,200. And if we could have gotten the parts, it was in excess of about $7,000 worth of damage because it damages the dash cover to where the dash cover is not replaceable. It rips the passenger side off, and it's you can't sew it back up or anything along those lines. It destroys the whole dash harness, which goes into the cluster and goes into the trans. It destroyed both front airbags, and the passenger airbag is actually designed to deploy so that it will push out the front windscreen so that the occupant doesn't have glass fall on them. So it broke the front windshield as well. Those parts weren't available because it was an older Jeep. There is a rule that OEM manufacturers have to follow. It's called the 11-year rule. Manufacturers have to have supporting components to keep a vehicle on the road to the 11th year of operation. So after 10 years, they can start not offering parts for it. On the 11th year, they don't have to offer anything. This vehicle was past that 11th year rule. There was no factory parts available, nor could we get junkyard parts. So we actually had to buy the vehicle out from the customer at that point. So we do want to make sure that we are being very cognizant of airbag safety. The key thing with that is when we're dealing with airbags, disconnect the negative battery cables. The first step you should do doing any repair on a vehicle. What that does is that reduces the electrical charge in the capacitors of the module for the airbag system, and it's less likely to deploy. The other thing is when we take an airbag physically out, so if it's a passenger airbag or driver airbag, we always set it down face up. If we set it down face down, it can blow up at us, but if we have it face up, it will blow up and it won't expand at all, and it won't come up and hurt you at all if there's a vibration or anything that goes along with that. Now, my buddy Dave that did have the two airbag deployments, I also said he blew up a door. The way that he did that was actually, this was gnarly. He was using spray silicone in an aerosol can to lubricate a window channel for an electric window as it goes up and down. Well, the window motor uses a brushed electrical motor. Those of you that are into electronics probably already know this. Those of you that aren't, a brushed motor actually has brushes writing on the commutator of the motor, and it creates sparks. So if you ever look in like an older electric drill, there's a vent on the back, and if you turn it, you can actually see it sparking the whole time. Well, with the aerosol propellant of the lithium grease, it combusted and it actually blew the door outward. So it was gnarly because the door dented outward on the panel, and then the inner door card blew off. And it was one of those, you look at it and you're just like, this is wild, because it just went and expanded out. Dave again had some hearing ringing after that one, and he didn't get hurt thankfully, and we still had to replace the whole door on a car. So that was one of those situations that wasn't super fun. Now, in terms of again SRS equipment, these will only work if you're wearing your seatbelt properly. So making sure that the seatbelt is properly used is key with those. And we again want to make sure we're paying attention to proper safety procedures. Now I have this photo here to show there's a lot more airbags in a vehicle than you kind of take consideration for. So we have the front passenger airbags. We have the side curtains, which come down to prevent any dirt, debris, or your head leaving the vehicle. There's side bolsters. That's the one that's going up on the sides of the seats, and then knee bolsters as well, so that you don't have your knees hit the bottom of the dash. On top of that, the seatbelt pretensioners. So the seatbelts, you have the ratcheting mechanism. To put the seatbelt on. Once you put that ratcheting mechanism on, that will deploy as well. So in the case of a vehicle having airbags deployed, you have to replace all of those components. Now, this is going to kind of go into chapter 2 a little bit. When you look at a vehicle that has a salvage title, if it's a collision salvage title, you might not want to jump on that one because you don't know if they've replaced all of this airbag equipment, right? And you don't know for sure if it's going to deploy correctly. And basically, in this type of situation, if the airbag's deployed on this vehicle, headliner, dash, steering wheel, clock spring, all 4 seats, bottom portion of the dash, headliner, all of that has to be replaced. So that's looking at why vehicles get totaled so easily. Now, an airbag fault will set one of the warning lights on immediately. We're going to talk about the different warning lights in a later chapter, but we're going to talk about this one right off the bat. If you get an airbag warning light, there are immediate trip fault, meaning that they just need one little instance and they will set the light. And if there's a light on, that oftentimes means that the system will not function. So you don't want to be driving around with an airbag light, and you need to remedy it as quick as possible. There are special tools that are airbag simulators. They're basically called load testers. And it puts the system under load to simulate like the airbag is installed. And it's a safe way to do diagnostic without running the risk of it deploying. Now, when the airbag light's on, again, the system might function or it might deploy at an irregular time. So we want to make sure that we are paying attention to that. Now, kind of to go over this, so, as a summary, safety is the key thing that we're going to be paying attention to here in the shop. We're going to be making sure that you're wearing your safety glasses. We will be providing rubber gloves for you. Those will be on a cart that you can get as needed. But we want to make sure we're paying attention. We're paying attention to the cars coming in and out, cars going on the lift, any equipment. If we're turning the vehicle on, we want to make sure that we have our hands and everything clear. Communication is key with that. We want to make sure that we're communicating with our fellow students, that we're doing a certain function. So if you're starting a vehicle, before you start the vehicle, hey, I'm starting this vehicle, so that those that might be inside the engine compartment have all of their hands and arms and everything free from that. A couple other things that we want to pay attention to, again, clothing wise, we want to make sure that we don't have any jewelry. So no necklaces or anything. Those can get caught in turning or rotating devices. We also don't want to have them be conductive. A lot of times they're gold and silver, very, very conductive material. So if you have any chains, necklaces, or anything like that, take them off. Again, no bracelets, no watches or anything on your wrist. for again multiple reasons. It can be an instance where you can have it as a grab hazard. It can be to where they can be conductive. You also want to not have any rings on your fingers. Rings can be conductive and you can electrocute yourself. My high school auto shop teacher, his wedding ring was permanent. It actually shorted and it's his gold ring was permanently embedded into his skin. And it was never leaving his finger ever again. So good thing that his marriage worked out for so long. But we want to make sure that we don't have any rings on anything like that. For those of you that do have longer hair, tie your hair up and back in a tight ponytail. Usually it's best to put it under a hat if you possibly can. A baseball hat working under a shop vehicle is usually a good idea. Prevent stuff from falling on your hair as well as it won't get caught. Tucked in shirts, I'm hit or miss with that. Make sure that obviously you don't have a long shirt tail that's going to get caught in anything spinning. However, usually a untucked shirt, you're going to do less damage to a car's paint if you lean on the vehicle. And like, work shirts like this, it has a special cover over the buttons so that you're not scratching it. Same thing with belt buckles. Don't have large belt buckles or have a composite belt buckle if that's going to be the case, because then you won't scratch paint and it won't be conductive. And then wear clothing that, you don't mind getting dirty. That way there's no risk to you wrecking your car or your clothes on the way home. So with that, we should have everything covered, and that kind of concludes everything with our presentation for the day. So with that, we're kind of wrapping up a little bit early. This is going to be one of the quicker videos because we're only going over one chapter. So please take the time to make sure we're completing our SP2 safety test. Again, we want to make sure that we are getting done our safety requirements for the course. So that's going to go along the lines of making sure that we have all of our SP2. So if I bring this back up so that we can kind of have the breakdown of what it is, we need to make sure that we are completing the Automotive Service Safety, Automotive Pollution Prevention, and the Automotive Lift Institute. These 3 SP2 tests have to be done and completed by next week. This is a graded assignment. I will have those grades. I'll grade those probably Tuesday afternoon and Monday or Tuesday and send you all emails for any of you that are missing it. If you use up your 4 attempts on one of the exams, I will go, you just send me an email, I'll go through and unlock it for you. It's not a problem. And then please make sure you're paying attention to that. If you would like, you can email me that you've completed your certificates. So at the end of SP2, you do get, if you go through and you look at your own, whoops. If you look at your own certificates, it will come up and it will show them. So if I show, certificates you've earned, it will go through and it will show you the certificate at the end, which you can get to. I'm making a total mess of this. Their view certificate. So we'll come up with this certificate. You can email that to me. Some of you that are working in the field, this may put you in compliance with your employer. So you might get credit for this. The worst they can say is no. These are valid for 1 academic year. So bummer for summer, and this is always a disappointment, is you will have to take these again in the fall. However, the way that we work these is every fall, everyone takes the SP2. Once you've completed it, you're good for all of the automotive classes for the fall, spring, and summer semesters. So there's a handful of you that are also taking Mr. Lindstrom's electrical class in the evening. You only have to complete the SP2 once. So if you complete the SP2, you get credit in Mr. Lindstrom's class and in my class. And I believe he grades them as well as a graded assignment. So if that's the case, you're kind of double dipping. You only have to do the assignment once. And then starting in the fall, you only have to do the final exams because you've already gone through Auto 100. You can get through the 3 exams really quickly. You'll get credit for every class that you take. So I have a couple students, they'll take 4 of my classes in a semester. They have to take it once, and they'll get credit for all 4 classes, as well as any other instructor's classes that they're taking not only for that semester in the fall, but also in the spring and the summer if they take summer classes. So we try to make it advantageous for you to complete these. Again, these are industry recognized safety standards, so they might be used for your workplace. Bummer for me is at the dealership, I have to take a different group's safety training. They don't recognize these ones because they want us to all be on the same safety. So I have to take two sets of safety exams annually. I have to take one for the school because I have to be certified in these just like you all, and I have to complete the one at the dealership. So please make sure we are completing these. This is a graded assignment. If you have any questions regarding them, I will get back to you as soon as possible with that. So again, we're making sure automotive service safety, pollution prevention, and the ALI lift training. The other thing to kind of go over too is the videos are going into each section. So because this is following chapter 5, it will go in the chapter 5 section. Next week, chapter 1, 2, and 3, the PowerPoint will go in each one of those, or the lecture, I should say, will go in those, and these are always available for you. So here is the lecture that we did on Tuesday, so you can refer back to that if need be. Other than that, I appreciate you taking the time to stick around through the full lecture. I hope you all found this information helpful, and I look forward to seeing you all next week in class. So you all have a good rest of the week, and we'll see you then.